Hi everybody, thanks for tuning in. My name's Ed with 5'Oclock Garage, and we are at SEMA 2024. I'm here with Justin White and Brian Tooley. We're just kind of sitting around right now. We've basically finished up all of the things that we didn't get finished in Detroit before we shipped cars out. So we've had a chance to sit down. Justin and I have walked around the show a little bit. Brian, I'm sure you did as well. And I figured we'd just shoot the shit a little bit about what we saw here so far today. One of the things that came up in particular, we saw an intake manifold that looked a whole lot like something that you offer, Brian, and we were asking about it, and it just so happens you have a booklet.
Yeah.
So a lot of that going on these days, eh?
Unfortunately, way too much. Yeah. And you know, it's I guess it's the way of the world. People sending stuff to Asia and having it knocked off sometimes, or sometimes a very close version of it. And you know, it's, you know, for us who are trying to, you know, cast and machine, make everything 100% in the USA. I mean, obviously that does make it harder for us to compete on a price point. And, you know, but at the same time, I say that, and I'll fully admit that, you know, when you look at, you know, cranks and rods from Asia, you can't beat them. You know, if you want an affordable crankshaft and affordable rods, you're going to buy them from Asia. We do, you know, everybody does, you know. So, you know, fortunately, they're not good heat treat on camshafts, and they don't seem to know how to make performance valve springs. So that's great news for us. But you know, when you look at some of these products, you know, we've seen products from Asia that were incredibly good. The first crankshaft we inspected, incredible quality. We sell AN fittings from Asia, incredible quality, higher quality than what we buy from a vendor in the U.S. Right? You know.
What about as far as balance and tolerances and things like that? Are they just coming like kind of like a porter casting type deal, or?
Well, I mean, the cranks they're ready to balance. I mean, they're rough balanced. Okay. But you know, we had a micrometer made digital, and it had a stop. So when you take the micrometer and slide it over the journal, you know, you don't have to mess with it, right? It's spring loaded, it's digital. Mm-hmm. It stops exactly the right point, the center of the journal. And so we had a standard made, and so, you know, we zeroed it on the standard. And the first crank we checked, I set it on the crank and it read 0.0000, and I was like, well, this mic must be wrong.
Yeah, that's
no, it was that good.
It was that close.
Yeah.
I can tell you though, you know, so I own a shop, and I have a BTR account. I buy parts from you guys every time I can. What I can say about any part made by some other company in some other country, when I have an issue or a question, I call Craig. Call him up. If he doesn't have an answer, he gets me an answer. He's fun to talk to. You know, we banter back and forth a little bit.
He is fun to talk to.
Yeah, and I can tell you that, you know, that's going to be a big thing missing when you're buying that, you know, that's that right. Other. And here's the other thing: is that intake manifold that looks a whole lot like BTR? Is that throwing a bunch of air at the back cylinders? You know, what's going on? Yeah. Who do I know that's run that intake manifold? Yeah. And the answer is nobody. But I can call my sales rep at Brian Tooley Racing. He can say, hey man, so and so just bought 3 of those things because he's had such good luck with them. Here's his phone number. Yep. And, you know, I want to put as high a quality product out as I can.
And something for consistency.
Absolutely.
Consistency is everything.
You know, when we're speccing a build, I have a customer and they want X, Y, Z. You know, I'll call this guy and say, hey, you just did it. We were just talking the other day. You just did that build. What did it take? And I can, you know, but I can't ask that of most of the foreign vendors, any of the foreign vendors.
Well, and once we test it, just like I had sent to you the other day, we did the BTR Stage 1 cam with a set of ported heads. I made 992 wheel. Yeah. And this is on Ignite Red, nothing, no crazy fuels, nothing fancy, just a Stage 1 cam, ported heads, and port injection. And
it's a pretty stout LT4.
It's real stout.
It's a real stout. It had a Kong ported blower as well.
Yeah.
But you know, I'll send those results to you every time I get some things like that, and then he can take that data and apply it, and then over time he'll be like, hey, what about this? And we'll try different things out. Yeah. I can't do that with China.
You know, the other thing you just mentioned as well, so I have one of those Stage 1 camshafts in an LT4 ZL1 Camaro, and stout is, I mean, that car is impressive. There's no two ways about it.
The camshaft works.
You almost need a little pillow for the seat.
Yeah.
If your head's not back, it'll snap it.
Well, the hardest part was the name, the stage
Yeah.
1.
That's
that
the
was
problem.
the hardest part.
We need to
Yeah.
rename it.
I know.
Yeah.
We got bad influence.
Call
but
it the
I'm
big
not-
stick.
I like I like both of those.
Because like, is it a big, no, it's just big results, big stick.
Yeah.
So going back to stock cubes and a stage 1 camshaft to go faster, my customers initially don't want to hear that. But now that car's on the road and they're seeing the results of what that combo can put down, that's amazing.
Yeah.
And we're doing it in many cars.
Well, but you look at the stock LT camshafts. An LT1 has 200 intake duration, right? An LT4, LT5 cam has 188 intake duration. Well, why are they running that much less intake duration?
Well, when we tested that, it was 100 horsepower different
it
from
works.
an LT1 to an LT4 cam. The
Unbelievable.
LT1 was 100 horsepower down, which is crazy, but
It's less is more in that
it
regard.
makes sense.
Well, but here's the thing. You have to think about runner length and inertia ramp, right? When you've got a stock intake manifold with a runner length that's this long, and then you've got a supercharger that's got an intake manifold that's this long,
Yep.
The camshaft open and close events
Yep.
radically change with that radical change in runner length, right? Particularly intake valve close.
Yeah. Speaking of runner length, that's an interesting question, and this may sound stupid, but I'm curious. How much difference does it make when you put a port plate underneath those blowers and increase it by that? Negligible?
I mean, you might get some advantages with heat, right? But in terms of runner length, I mean, you've not changed it enough
Okay.
to measure
Interesting.
in that regard.
so what are we thinking about? It's about a quarter, 3/4 of an inch,
Yep,
1
three-quarter.
inch.
Yep, exactly.
But what about have you ever done any testing with the blower spacer lid, like the lid spacers, to get more volume?
We have not, but we've done some testing with plenum volume. An equalizer intake that has a lid, and we actually made 3 1/2-inch spacers. And I was talking to my friend Richard Holdner, and he was just like, "Look, just stack all 3 together for your first test, because that way you don't have to waste any time
Right.
testing 1 inch and 1/2 inch." And we did. So we put an 1.5-inch spacer on there. Nothing.
Really?
Nothing.
Nothing. Yeah.
Isn't it?
Plenum volume is maybe important. As you get probably higher in RPM, you run a 10,000, 11,000 RPM engine, plenum volume gets, I think, more important. But, for what we're doing, 7,500 RPM hydraulic roller, I mean, you look at the Trinity intakes.
Yeah.
Those Trinity intakes work extremely well, and the plenum is, this big, right?
Yeah.
It's not a very big plenum,
Right.
but it works,
Right. Now, so there are some aftermarket lids out there, and I actually have never even tried any of them out, to be honest. What about the shape of how they're?
Yeah. Now that, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
Getting that air to turn would be your biggest advantage.
So there is a beneficial to that.
in my opinion. Yeah.
Well, have you
I'm
ever
not testing
seen?
it.
I believe it was Plasma Man that did the multiple different plenums on the Coyote, and they were talking almost 100 horsepower difference in their plenum difference.
Wow.
And that's a
It
turbo
was
intake?
I think it was a turbo car.
Yeah, I can.
Yeah, I would say one of those intakes had an issue. That's a
Yeah, because
It's a-
I remember it was very vague, so I'd have to go back and find it.
Yeah.
Another thing you mentioned was, the supercharger port. Another guy that I like to deal with is Jokers.
Yep.
That's another guy I can call, Brett over there, and if I have a question about who's doing what the latest things are, that guy is an open book as far as what he's doing, airflow patterns and everything else. He's taught me a lot about how those things work and why what he does works. Not knocking Kong, I've used Kong in the past as well. I just, it's one of those things. I think if I could, maybe I'm old. Well, I am old, but maybe I'm old school, and I like to pick up the phone and I like to talk to people and I like to hear why their combinations work. I like to hear what they have feedback-wise.
And you can't knock Joker has results.
yeah.
I mean, they both do, obviously, but
Yeah.
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 For sure.
Yeah, you really have to test the stuff back to back to know what is what, right?
Right.
And that's the thing that I see that's largely missing in the industry is the back-to-back testing. It's just
The
like, oh, we
R&D
put
is
this
lacking.
combination in this car, so this is the best heads ever, the best camshaft ever. It's like, okay, so that combination worked in that car, you know, they'll say, well, we put this cam, you know, this other cam in this other car and it made 10 horsepower less or something. It's just like, yeah, but it's a different car with a different engine. I mean, stock cars don't even make the same exact power.
It's very, we've seen absolute differences with the Hellcat platform and the LT4 platform. You know, I've got to say, it's funny because as we're talking, I'm thinking about this. I used to think years ago that basically if you were adding boost to something, it was a lot less picky about all of the other parts of the combination. The first thing that made me question everything, I think it was a Facebook chat or something, but I was listening to people banter back and forth about tuners and all these things, and this cocky guy from Houston, Texas told me, there's a tuner from down there, and he told me 100% he'll add 100 horsepower to any LT4 car I got out there right now, no questions asked. And I was like, man, this guy's absolutely full of shit. So I tied a car down, and I had a guy tuning it that was, you know, a good tuner. You know, still tunes a lot of cars, has a shop. Will not say any names. I tied that car down. I did a base hit. I made sure I was checking it. Didn't get hot. IATs didn't get, nothing changed really. This guy loads in one revision, and I told him I don't want any more ignition timing, and I don't want it any leaner. And his first response was, it's already too lean, and I won't change anything. I'll actually fatten it up, and I'm not adding more timing to it. 78 wheel horsepower on my Mustang dyno.
Yeah.
And that was how I dropped
You're
everything,
like, yeah,
and I
okay,
started listening to this guy.
But that's because we do the R&D. Yeah. We've been doing the R&D since back in the LSA blower days. You know, because I'm a natural skeptic. I always have been. And
there's nothing wrong with that.
It helps, I think. Yeah. But I think people are just kind of getting complacent with, oh, well, this guy's running this and this. But 9 times out of 10, that dude's full of shit. 9 times out of 10, he's running this and this, but he's also got this and this, and he's not.
Yeah.
I don't work like that.
Yeah, that stock short block's actually a 416.
Right.
Things like that. Yeah.
And nitromethane maybe mixed into some things. And
exactly.
When I test stuff, I try to test it with, you know, regular pump E85 if I can. Yeah. You know, I don't do anything different, like my own car. You know, everything that's on it, I've posted everything on it. If you copied it, it would run the exact same time.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to say, hey, you can do this, I do this, and then your car's half a second slower.
Yeah.
That's what I see a lot in this industry.
You know, while we're talking about, you know, quality people out there doing good things in the car world, Brian, you know, I had a situation with an engine that it was a cam part. We did a camshaft swap on an LS3 car a couple of years ago. And I can't tell you, that hit my business at a time when, you know, everything was tight. Everything was tight. And I had an issue with a camshaft part that we put in the car, and it put metal all through everything, and it tore the whole motor up. And it was one of those things where, man, you guys didn't have to do anything. I know that we went back and forth enough to say that, you know, maybe there was a possibility that we got, you know, some sort of issue with a part. Also, something that my technician did wasn't probably exactly up to snuff on that particular deal. And you know, I think it was kind of we split it situation, you know, and I can't tell you that I really appreciated that. And you know, and the guys that I worked with.
This guy had the same problem.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it's the same thing,
yep.
You know,
Yep.
And a cam had a burr on the front of it, the nose where it goes against the retaining plate, and chewed the retaining plate up that fast, you know, and it's just like, you know, it had the technician installer, you know, done the wiggle test to make sure it had in play, he'd have found that there was a problem because it didn't wiggle, right? But at the same time, it's just like, well, we did sell you the camshaft, so, you know, let's work together to get your customer taken care of.
And we did.
So speaking of that, you know, and that may be an important piece of information for technicians out there that are doing camshaft installs and LSLT motors. You know, can you go over what you kind of think is a good procedure to make sure that wiggle test, you've got enough play?
Well, I mean, you know, it's almost like wiggling rods, connecting rods.
Yep.
You know, you torque the rods up, you know, there should be about 20,000 side play with rods.
Yep.
You know, so if you just grab the two of them, if it wiggles on that rod journal, it's, you know, at least it's not bound. There is a very high-end, high-profile engine builder in Georgia that built an LSX 388 for a good customer of ours. In no time, it kicked a rod out, and he sent the engine to us. And you know, I wanted to personally look at it. I'm taking it apart, and the two rods on the rear of the engine welded themselves together on the cheeks. And I'm like, well, that seems odd. And of course, broke one and destroyed the engine. And so I finally think about the rod bearing fillet, because if you know they're marked upper and lower, and the upper goes to the upside of the engine, the lower goes to the lower side of the engine. If you get those flipped, the rod bearing rubs the fillet on the journal.
Right.
So this is a Pro Mod engine
that's
builder.
pushing them together.
Yeah, pushing them together. Pro Mod engine builder didn't get the bearings installed on this engine correctly, right? You know, so it's very interesting what you get into out there in the big world. And of course, they did not do anything for him.
Yeah, and you know, we're human, right? And on top of that, if we were brilliant, we might not be wrenching on cars. But I can say that, you know, I had the same situation with a very prominent engine builder. I had an LT, a 416-inch LT motor built by them, and the first time it came back, it was a short block. My tech did exactly that, you know, just kind of shaking everything down, and I don't remember what two rods they were, but they weren't moving.
Yeah.
And you could see where they had dinged the rod in on the end when it maybe caught the cylinder wall when they were smacking it. It caught something on the way in or something, and they bolted it together anyhow. And luckily he caught that before we put it together. The weird thing is, so we sent it back down, they sent it back up, and somebody had dropped the engine block and chipped a piece off of the front of this thing.
Wow.
So then we had to send it down again, and they had to replace the block.
Yeah.
And that's the last time I used to. They took care of it.
Yeah.
But gosh, you know, it's
still painful.
It's
for
hard,
you and the customer.
Right? Absolutely. You know, and it was July or something, which in Michigan that's a big deal because time's running out. You know.
Oh yeah, short season.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, but no, the cam wiggle test. You know, I don't remember the exact specs. I don't know if it's like 3 to 10 thousandths or exactly, but you know, basically it needs to wiggle some, right?
Sure. I think it was 7 or 8.
It's not quite that tight, right? There's probably a good 5 thousandths leeway there. But if you grab that thing, because you know, you should also be able to, you know, obviously the chain's got some slop. You should be able to, you know, rotate it clockwise, counterclockwise, and wiggle it. If it does none of those, take it apart. Right.
And I'm sure someone buys a camshaft from you guys and they were interested in what that test looks like, they can call their sales guy and he can figure it out for them. So.
Yeah. Yes. We see a lot of issues with that. There's someone made aftermarket, probably not in USA, cam retaining plate. They were too thick. And then they've also made gears that were too thick.
That's what I had. I had a cam gear, we think, that was too thick.
Yeah.
And it should have probably been caught, you know, had we had enough play in there.
Yeah.
And it, you know, it lasted a little while, which I think we all talked about the fact that it probably was just barely on the thick side. And it's a very well-known name too.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, you gotta do some. I mean, because a wiggle test on that camshaft, that's easy stuff.
Yep.
And yeah, that would save you some problems. That would save, you know, you guys some problems.
Yeah.
And you know, but you know, it's training your techs, right? I mean, you know, looking for all the issues. You know, and we see stuff all the time that it's just like, you know, that the people that did it can't believe they did it, right? I had a CTSB one time. You know, one of our rocker arm bolts broke, right? And the weird thing about the rocker arm bolt breaking was the rocker had been the rocker had misaligned so bad that it was opening the valve with the retainer, right? It tore the retainer up. I'm like, well, wait a minute. If a bolt breaks, it's going to be a clean break. Yep. The rocker arm's not going to be hitting the retainer. That rocker arm came loose first, right? So I said, send me the stand, send me the rockers, all that stuff. So he sends it to me, and I pick up the stand, and there's two marks on that stand, 2 lines, like a line here and a line here. You put the trunnion on upside down, right? Torqued it, right. So it initially torques, right? And then it digs into the stand, and then it gets loose. And then, you know, it gets loose enough, it's going to break the bolt off. Something's going to give. And he sent me pictures at the beginning of this, so I went back to the pictures, zoomed in on it. You could see that the trunnion was upside down in the picture. And I sent it to him. I'm like, here's your problem. He's just like, oh my God, I can't
Son of a bitch.
I cannot believe I made
Yeah.
that mistake, right? But here's the flip side to that story. He never came clean with all of his friends that he said broke a BTR rocker bolt. I mean, this was like a notorious thing. Like everybody in this town knew about this BTR rocker arm bolt breaking, but he never came clean to them that he actually installed the training upside down.
Yeah,
You know?
that's bad.
It's bad, yeah.
If I make a mistake, I remember when I timed Wendy's car off one tooth. I don't want to talk about it.
That's right. Yeah.
I text
the check
Brian.
engine light.
I'm like, what is going on with this cam? This thing is
I'm
wrong.
Like, man.
It's like makes nothing, and boom! I was like, dude, what did you spec this thing for?
You didn't get a cam correlation code?
So what happened was,
Oh, it's a Gen 4.
I put it off one.
Yeah.
It ran.
Gen 5 will.
But
ask me how I know.
But I'm just saying, I mean,
It'll pop up
people
a
make
code.
mistakes,
Yeah.
even me.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm pretty close to perfect, but
Yeah, and that's another issue we work through.
Yep.
You know,
Yep.
I mean, you could have just called somebody else, a competitor, and say those guys suck, and give me the camshaft. But you call me, you're like, hey, here's the dynagraph, and I'm like, okay, well, something's off, right? It looks.
well, I think you called it. I think you were like, "Are you sure you didn't put a tooth off?" And I'm like, "There's no way I did that."
Yeah,
and I was like,
no
"You know
way.
what? He's asking. I'm gonna check." And I checked, and it was off.
Yeah.
But that's something that I wish a lot of these people would just take the second that when you have an issue, call the guy, call the manufacturer. I mean, if you're buying
Absolutely.
all your stuff out of China, I don't know who you're gonna call, but call the people, talk to them. I've always done that. If I have an issue with a product, I'll always call them first.
Yeah.
I give them multiple times to try to make it right. And if they don't, and I feel like it's a dangerous thing, I'll have to make a post and say something about it.
Yeah,
But,
but
9
don't
times out
start.
of 10, they get handled.
Yeah, don't start with the social media post.
Right.
That's the worst way because then nobody wants to do anything
No.
for you.
Yeah.
And then that ultimately hurts everybody.
Yeah.
So speaking of that experience that I had, since then we did this stage 1 LT4 I was talking about. We put an entirely new short block together. It was a rod and piston motor, and man, this thing,
Oh, this was wild.
it would idle. Oil pressure was great. I had a K-Tech oil pump in there. Idle oil pressure was great. You'd start to make a pull. I was making my first few pulls on the street, right? I mean, to the speed limit, and all of a sudden, oil pressure would go to about 33 psi and fall off. And I let out. By the time I let out, it was at 19 psi, and I was at like 5,500 RPM. And I thought, oh my gosh, what's going on?
What do you think caused that?
I talked to one of your guys over there. So you got a guy. Is it maybe Jim builds engines? There's one of your guys that assembled. What is it?
Reed.
I did talk to Reed. Was there an older guy? Or is that it? Okay, then it was Reed. It's a good thing he and I aren't dating because I'm bad with names. Anyhow, so I called him up and just wanted to run it by. I called everybody. I talked to this guy. I talked to everybody I could think of. We took the oil path. We followed, we traced the oil path all the way through everything. We learned a lot about how oil flows through an LT4 motor, let me tell you. Swapped out the pan, swapped out the oil pump. We swapped out everything and couldn't figure it out. Who was the guy that you sent me to, the engine builder in Texas? I don't remember his name either. I talked to everybody who would listen, and nobody could figure that out.
It might have been Rolly.
We took the oil pan down. There's that oval O-ring that seals the oil pan to the oil pump. We clayed that thing and put it up and checked that 100 times. Every time you're taking the oil pan out of the car, the front suspension comes out, the whole cradle comes. Let me tell you that the barbell, if you put an LS barbell in an LT motor, that's what it'll do.
You get.
Really?
Really.
Right?
So I talked to your guys and I said, you should probably, I pulled the parts, I put it all together, my tech put it together the engine builder put it together with the parts that I gave him, and that was the problem.
How many times do you think that's been done?
Several.
So I told him, it might not be a bad idea to update your website and say, do not use
Yes.
But didn't you measured it out?
It's like what was it? It was
really close.
like 3 millimeters or 4 millimeters different in length.
3
And
millimeters. That's
No, it's smaller than
that's
that.
120,000.
It was
Was it
3 or 4,000.
Was it? Yeah, it was. I don't remember what it was.
It was really close.
It was close.
but-
I have pictures in my phone. It
But
was
they
real
are
close.
they are different. The
Yep.
LS and the LT barbell are different.
And you guys
If you
sell
look
them-
at it naked eye, they're the same.
They're damn close. And you guys sell them different, and you label them different. So it's
But
my
make
fault.
sure
Yeah.
that people don't mix that
Don't
up.
get-
I
the
think
wrong
I
one.
had with my technician. I think I had 100 hours into that.
This went on for weeks
Lost. Yeah.
Lost.
because we couldn't figure it out.
Yeah. And luckily the customer was awesome. He was, once you get your head above a certain level in this scene where you got some fast cars and you're hurting some feelings out on the street, you become a target, you know? And this customer I know was involved in many different group chats where people were bashing the hell out of me and bashing the hell out of my shop. And this guy hung in there the whole time. You know,
he's a good customer.
He's a great customer. Young kid too, early 20s. Very rare to see that. Very rare to see that. Yeah. But yeah, so anyway, don't do that.
Yeah, amen.
So before we,
let's talk about some of the stuff that maybe you've seen here that maybe you didn't expect to see. Well, we know you know everything, but
no,
maybe some things
I'll never know everything.
You thought, that you weren't gonna see, or maybe some things that you saw here that were really cool, or like the electric motor controller from HP Tuners.
Well, I haven't even.
I know. Go ahead.
I haven't even seen that, but I've only been to a handful of booths today, unfortunately, so I've not seen a lot. But one of the ideas that I had 3 years ago, ironically, as a ProCharger booth, and they had a billet Gen 5 intake, and I'm looking at this intake, and of course there's about this much space from the bottom of Plum to the, to the valley. And I was like, if you were doing a truck intake manifold, you could do a low throttle body, intercooled truck intake for a centrifugal supercharger.
Right.
Put a brick in there.
And Eric Radson's a friend of mine, and I can't remember if I said anything to him or not, but it was and we've got Slack, and so I had taken a picture of it and put it in our Slack, and because we'd been talking about this intercooled intake for ProCharger and for centrifugal supercharger, and then we come to the show and they've got one here, and it's just like, well, that's interesting.
Sure shit.
Yeah. So, but great minds think alike. Like I said, I don't remember that, but it was interesting seeing that, I guess, because that was an idea we had a few years ago, and we started on it, but we abandoned the project, quite honestly, and so unfortunately, I've got very limited exposure here to the show so far.
Yeah. Speaking of that, we talked a little bit about copying projects, and a good friend of mine, Alex Chudd, owns a website called budgetbillet.com. I screwed that up, budgetbillet.com. And he did a Hellcat intake made for like a twin turbo application or centrifugal with the with the brick and all that right in it. And there's all of a sudden it's popping up everywhere, and they're very similar. Very similar.
He was mad about that.
He's a little upset. The funny part is I saw pictures of one of the big Hellcat guys is offering an intake manifold, and you can see it almost looks like the throttle body blade's not going to be able to open all the way because it's crashing right into the it's kind of diving into that brick pretty hard. And that was something that Alex fixed real early on. So anyway, just like you said, it's possible that it was just great minds thinking alike.
Oh yeah, it's happened with me over and over and over. So people have the same ideas. Yeah, they just do.
Yeah, we all think the same. What about you, Justin? Anything that was interesting? Don't talk about electric stuff. All right, talk about.
I can't talk about anything.
I will tell you what to think about. But anyway, anything that stood out to you that you saw so far?
I mean, honestly, we've been working the whole time.
Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at too.
Yeah,
I've seen things and they're all a little blurry because I'm very tired. But I'm with you. I think day 2 will reveal some of that. We'll talk a little bit more about that. And
definitely go actually visit some booths.
Yeah, right.
It's just, man.
Yeah.
Well, Brian, thank you so much for stopping in. I got to say, coming here, I didn't really ever have this, what do they call it, on my bingo card. I didn't think I'd be meeting up with you and doing a podcast or whatever, or an interview with you. But what a treat, man. It's been, it's been great doing business.
Always a pleasure.
Thank you for having me.
And this guy, this is a last minute addition as well. I didn't think I'd be hanging out with him this week either. We're gonna get ready to interview Chris Harris from the African American Automotive Association. That's where we're broadcasting from today, and we're looking forward to that. Again, Brian, thank you very much, and we'll talk to you guys soon.